What? Fubuki has this skin and you think I'm not going to make any kind of bid or thing about it? I mean, alright, it's an adorable head pet, and she's definitely extremely happy for sure. I think this is one of the few skins I've gone and immediately bought as soon as it was available. I mean, it's such an adorable skin and her animations are pretty solid considering their live 2D game back then. But of course, there's one thing everyone wants, and that's the DOOT, right? Alright, Fubuki, play the horn. I meant the other one. Why would you do that inside? Oh. Okay, so today we're going to be moving on to another destroyer from the Sakura Empire, and one of the many residents with an instrument skin that I actually really do like. And that is none other than IJN Fubuki. Now, I know that there's another Fubuki among the Azur Lane's roster right now, but that one cheats, and we'll talk about her another time. Now, this Fubuki is one of the many destroyers of the Sakura Empire, so we generally have a good idea what that might mean in terms of her kit. However, the question is now, will her kit allow her to stand out among the many IJN destroyers? Well, let's just see how well she does. For the sake of this review, normally I would consider a character similar to her. I'd actually would consider Ayanami pre-retrofit, but they are actually sister ships, which leads to them having a near identical stat line. There are a few differences, but they won't make any major impact in this case. That said, I'll just go ahead and compare against all the elite Sakura destroyers currently. With that said, let's go ahead and start with her health pool. Sitting at 1,623, Fubuki's health pool sits roughly at the lower end of the spectrum. She may be a bit tankier than some destroyers, but she's got plenty of them that will easily beat her in survival based on health pool alone. Now, her light armor does give her better protection against most AP weapons and torpedo-based attacks, but she'll definitely get banged up pretty badly from HE-type weaponry. So make sure you have some good damage control or healing to mitigate this particular vulnerability. Her evasion also sits on the upper end compared to her counterparts. This could give her better odds at dodging, which technically could give her an upper leg against those with a higher HP pool. However, it should be noted that the overall differences between her counterparts are minimal, so it won't have as big of an advantage as we would think. Lastly, her anti-air is also on the lower end of the spectrum, as well. To be honest, destroyers aren't usually known for having very good anti-air. It also doesn't exactly help that Fubuki is from the Sakura Empire, who are generally lacking in this particular area. So if you're looking for anti-air, there's always the louder and more musical San Diego. Or I guess you can go Isuzu if you want to stick to the Sakura Empire, that's entirely up to you. Anyway, because of Fubuki's low anti-air, don't expect her to be very capable of taking planes down, or tanking attacks from them too well. Moving on to the offense side of things, her firepower is also pretty low. Much like anti-air, destroyers generally aren't amazing at firepower. Now, there are exceptions, but for the most part, firepower will be pretty low for most destroyers. Sakura Empire especially, as they choose to focus more into torpedoes rather than going into guns. Speaking of which, Fubuki's torpedo stat sits above most of her counterparts, and by a pretty good margin for a good number of them. She does lose to a few, but the difference isn't actually that drastic. That said, Fubuki will still do some pretty solid damage with her torpedoes, so thankfully she's got some power to her. Her reload also sits towards the upper end compared to her counterparts as well. It's not a noticeable difference, granted, but it'll help her a bit on her timers with the torpedoes. For the most part, her damage goes all into her torpedoes, so make sure that you've got some decent equipment on her. In regards to her equipment, Fubuki gets a second torpedo count, as well as a preload on her second limit break. In terms of her efficiencies, Fubuki's main DD gun sits at a below average efficiency of 75%. So she'll not do a whole lot of damage, especially with her already low firepower. It might be best to go with a more rapid firing gun, so that way you can at least spam her barrage more. Now her torpedo efficiency sits rather high among her counterparts, on 160%, so she'll have a really solid output with her torpedo-based attacks. Lastly, her anti-air gun sits at an average value of 75. It's not a crazy good efficiency, so like I said, it'd be better to rely on Isuzu for that output. Yes, Sandy works as well. Overall, she's par the course for your torpedo-loving Sakura Empire destroyer. So if you're running her, it might not be a bad idea to have her with a few torpedo buffing characters as well. However, she does have some pretty nasty competition, as Ayanami and Shigure both have retrofits, which will put them a bit above Fubuki stat-wise. When we look at her stat lines at higher levels... Oh, that does bring up one point I need to quickly talk about real quick. I know I've been comparing against level 120 and level 100. I'll still do that since I don't really feel that level 125 is a good idea to compare to from here onwards, as the differences between 120 and 125 aren't drastic enough. That said, I'll still show level 125 along with level 120 for those that are particularly interested. Anyway, at level 120, Fubuki gets a decent jump in her torpedo, evasion, and health pool. They aren't crazy jumps, mind you, but they will help her get a little extra out of just about everything that she can do. Same can be somewhat said, albeit on a smaller scale, for her stat line at level 125. The jumps will be a little bit nice, but they really don't change the overall status of her kit compared to her sister ships and counterparts. So she still has some pretty rough competition among her peers, as we mentioned before. Now, granted, it is possible that her skills could give her that extra leg over her counterparts, so let's see if that actually happens. Fubuki has one lone skill, and that is Special Lead Ship, which will increase some of the stats for a handful of destroyers. For those wondering who is in that group, that would be Ayanami, Akatsuki, Ikuzuchi, Inazuma, Fubuki herself, and Hibiki. Now, I will say that this group seems to also include Uranami and Shirayuki on the wiki, but it's not in this skill description, so I can't necessarily say I know if it applies to these two as well. Now, the skill grants those particular ships up to a 30% increase in firepower and evasion, and up to a 10% increase in torpedo. These are nice buffs for those particular characters, and Ayanami will definitely benefit from the evasion and torpedo boost. The evasion boost specifically will help out destroyers, as they do need that evasion to help them survive with their lower HP pools. Honestly though, this skill doesn't really hold a candle to some of the crazy torpedo boosting skills that characters like Jinsu and Noshiro give. The firepower boost won't be too amazing either, as most of the characters this skill affects don't have insanely high firepower to begin with. The evasion boost will always be nice, but the concern about health pools can be somewhat mitigated with auxiliaries or a healer. That said, the skill is still a decent self-buff, but to get the most out of it, you'll have to use two of the other ship girls mentioned in the list as well. Triple DD Vanguards usually aren't the best way to go either, especially if they're more torpedo-focused than gun-focused. Now, overall, Fubuki is much like a good majority of the Sakura Empire destroyers. Solid torpedo DD with a decent evasion setup. Fubuki does have a nice skill that'll probably be more than likely used for self-buffing herself than buffing her buddies that might sortie with her. She does have a lot of weaknesses that come with being a destroyer in general, but a well-rounded Vanguard can allow her to work while covering her weaker areas. That said, is Fubuki a mob or boss fleet Vanguard? I don't think I could see her in boss fleets, as there are way more efficient Vanguards for torpedo damage. Even more so now that we have a ultra-rare destroyer from the Sakura Empire in play now. Fubuki will still do okay in the mob fleet though, but might struggle in the later levels. This is just something I feel comes from being one of the many older ships in the game. Seniority is nice, but it's becoming a lot more apparent now that that is working against the characters than for them. Now, this might make some of us wonder, why would one even use her in the first place? Well, there's always at least one argument that works, and that is that newer players might have her from building in the light pool. Considering what it takes to get Ayanami alone, Fubuki can work as a decent substitute for the time being. Once newer players start getting their rosters established, Fubuki won't be able to compete too well against stronger destroyers and torpedo comps. Outside of that though, hey, feel free to use her if you're wanting to. Maybe you just want to go and commit Operation Boat Dude. I can't believe I just said that. Anyway, I don't think she's absolutely horrible, so feel free to use her as you wish. Now, there is one downside to Fubuki's skill, and that will force players to bring in the other ship girls that it affects if players are wanting to really maximize the use of the skill. However, it still does at least buff herself, so it can still help her out to a degree, if choosing to opt to that option instead. Other than that, she has no other restrictions on your fleet. Now, at the end of the day though, Fubuki will be much like your standard torpedo-loving destroyer. The Sakura Empire does have many, so that will make it very difficult for her to compete against them all. And sadly, her skill and kit isn't really going to help her stand out that much. Feel free to use her if you want to though, and if she's your waifu destroyer, well, She's got one heck of an adorable headpad animation for that live 2D skin. Oh, and for the few of you that put her in the chicken suit, I swear to God. And that'll be all for Fubuki. I hope you enjoyed it and that'll help you in your future endeavors. Up next is the personal pick, Noshiro. So look forward to that Cinnamon Rolls video when it comes out. Glad to finally have these videos back out now that the Lord video project is over. Anyway, whether you're a regular viewer or patron supporting the channel on Patreon, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next live stream or video that I do. Till then, I'll see you guys all again real soon.